So sometimes it's hard to see the outlines because we're right in the middle of it, but America really is in the middle of a profound social upheaval. Nothing is the same as it was a year ago. That's not your imagination, it's really happening. What we're seeing is an actual history-changing revolution. In place of Robespierre's famous liberty, equality, fraternity, our HR departments have produced their own three-word revolutionary slogan: diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, this is different from what's happened in other countries. Unlike the revolutions in most places, in America, the working class is not the hero of this story. Our working class is the villain. This is not a proletarian revolution, it's a revolution from above. It's aimed straight downward. And you can tell by who's running it. College professors write the radical literature, politicians put their words into practice, the biggest companies in the world pay for all of it. So maybe not surprisingly, for all their revolutionary fervor, the groups pushing this revolution leave their own power untouched. When you hear people talk about dismantling systems of oppression, they're not talking about themselves, they're talking about you. This is a revolution expressly designed to empower the already powerful. But most striking of all, now that we're discussing things that haven't changed at all, have been the universities. The overwhelming majority of the ideas behind this revolution come from college campuses. Everything you hear about white privilege and systemic racism began as a lecture about deconstruction in some classroom in the 1990s. And that's why so many BLM activists talk like sociology professors. But most of the actual changes on college campuses have been superficial. Yes, the coursework is very different. Yale no longer even pretends to teach its students anything, it just indoctrinates them. But here's what hasn't changed at all, and this is the key to everything. What hasn't changed at all is the kind of people who go to Yale in the first place. They're rich kids from rich families who plan on staying rich. Not speculation, here are the numbers. The median family income in the United States was about 65 grand a year. At Yale, it's 3 times that. The median family income of a Yale University student is $192,000 a year. That's the median. At the University of Pennsylvania, it's about $196,000 a year. At Brown University in Providence, it's $204,000. These are all Ivy League schools with multi-billion-dollar endowments heavily subsidized by you through your tax dollars. So they could afford to educate poor kids, they just choose not to. At Princeton, 72% of students come from families in the top 20% nationally for household income. Nobody seems to have any plans to change any of this. Diversity is for wage earners, not for the people in charge. No one's trying to diversify prestigious campuses because in real life, let's be honest, the lack of diversity is the real reason that people go there in the first place. No one applies to Yale in order to learn things. That's not the point. The point of going to Yale is to cement your position as a credentialed member of America's ruling class. That's the singular purpose of the experience, the only purpose. More than any other standard, more than any award in American society, an Ivy League degree increases the chance that those who hold it in the end will be giving the orders, not taking the orders. That effect is real and it lasts for generations. When you go to Yale, your grandkids probably won't have to work construction. So the question is, why should this arrangement continue? And that's a serious question, especially now. If you're going to dismantle systemic power, and we've decided we are going to, you probably shouldn't start with unionized cops in Kenosha. You probably should start with systems that wield actual power. America really does have a class system. They're absolutely right about that. That system is getting more rigid by the day, and we should probably do something about it pretty soon, or the next revolution might not be as peaceful as this one. So here's an idea. Beginning immediately, the top-ranked 50 colleges and universities in America should be prohibited by force of law, if necessary, from accepting students whose parents or grandparents went to college. No more rich kids. Harvard should be reserved exclusively for students who've never experienced the many advantages of living in a ruling class. If you're for diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is no faster way to achieve it than this. For example, the Biden administration has just announced plans to give amnesty and citizenship to an estimated 30 million foreign nationals now living in the United States illegally. Now, as of right now, you should know this, there is no plan to elevate any of these new Americans into our middle class. No, the plan is to keep them in serfdom at the bottom of the economic ladder. Someone needs to trim our trees and toss our kale salads. That's the view of Democratic donors, and they get their way always. But why should the rest of us accept their plan, designed only to benefit them? It's so obviously unfair. Why shouldn't the children of impoverished illegal aliens go to Duke, Cornell, Stanford, Williams, Amherst, Princeton? Why shouldn't they occupy every single bed on every single one of those campuses? So here's our advice to the members of the woke professional class at the Times and elsewhere who are about to discover that their own rules might actually apply to themselves. Here's our advice. Stop complaining. When you discover that your own children's life plans have been thwarted due to some new imperative of social justice, don't say a word. Don't whine or moan or file a lawsuit. Don't even acknowledge it's happening. Just accept it. Now, all of this might be hard for you to see right now. It's painful, and we get it. Because it's happening to you, it might even seem unjust. Trust us, it's not unjust. It's the definition of justice.
The United States is in a lot of debt. Currently, the country owes $27.2 trillion. But who would even lend them that much money? Who does the US owe this massive sum? Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. In large part, it owes itself that money. But there's also quite a few other countries it owes too. The US essentially owes two groups of people: the general public, which can be other countries or even investors in the US, and itself. But before we get into who makes up those groups and what the percentages look like, first, let's get some basics. Whenever the US government needs money, it raises that money through the issuing of savings bonds or treasury bonds. These bonds are basically pieces of paper that say the US will pay the person or agency that buys it back with a little bit of interest. Many people want to buy bonds because they're pretty solid investments, like banks, foreign governments, and maybe even you. The debt ceiling, which you may have heard about, is actually the cap that is set on what the US Treasury can issue in terms of bonds. Congress will raise the debt ceiling to finance government spending through the sale of more of these treasuries. With those basics out of the way of how the government is funded, who actually owns all of these bonds? No, it's not really one of our enemies or some secret super powerful group. Foreign governments and investors only own about 30% of overall US debt, whereas the remaining 70% is either held by US investors, the Federal Reserve, or even the US government itself. US investors, like banks, institutions, and regular people, own about 33% of the total debt. The Federal Reserve, or the US's privatized central bank, owns about 12% of the total debt. The US government itself actually owns roughly 27% of total debt. That may not make a lot of sense, but this is essentially agencies like Social Security, Medicare, and disability insurance buying up debt from the US Treasury and using interest payments on that debt to fund their own programs. Normally, you couldn't loan yourself some money, but in the case of governments that print the currency, they actually can. The remaining roughly 28 to 30% of debt is owned by foreign investors, the largest being China and Japan, but Brazil, Ireland, and the UK are other big purchasers. Investing in US treasuries allow these countries to control their currency value in relation to the US dollar, which can be beneficial for trade and other monetary policy. So, who does the US owe money to? Well, largely its own people, companies, and even itself. But a third of overall debt is owed to other countries. Do you think we'll ever pay it off?